Coming up on episode 64 of Creative Writing, I'm talking all about Pinterest for podcasters.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. This is episode 64, and I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant. You are in the right place, my friend, if you are someone trying to build an online platform without being or feeling smarmy. Specifically, writers, bloggers, creatives. This is me niching down people. This was intended to be a site for and a podcast for writers, but I have a lot of feet in a lot of worlds. That sounds really wrong. I wear a lot of hats. I'm mixing my metaphors now. But in any case, you are welcome here if you are in the online space and trying to find your perfect audience and possibly even sell your books or products, but you don't want to feel gross or icky. Today, as I mentioned in the intro, we are going to talk, we being me, all about using Pinterest as a podcaster. Now, don't run away. Don't turn this off if you are not a podcaster, because if you're wanting to utilize Pinterest, I think you'll still get some great info here, especially in the show notes, which you're going to find at creativewriting.com/064. I'm not going to cover everything in this episode that is in the show notes because there's a lot of stuff that gets really techie and weird and just doesn't translate to me talking about it so much as it does you heading over to the show notes. I have a video tutorial of making images vertical and a few other kind of visual aids, and then some really good tutorial links to setting up Pinterest if you have not gotten started. Let's go ahead and get started with Pinterest for podcasters, and I'm really, really thrilled to talk about this. Now, just in general, here's why I want to talk about this for podcasters. I'm in a couple podcasting groups. I listen to some podcasts on podcasting. Hey there, Jess and Elsie, and also Elsie and Rob from She Podcasts and The Feed, respectively. And kind of in not just their podcasts, because I don't know that She Podcasts that they've talked about this, Jess and Elsie, but I heard it mentioned on The Feed a little bit, kind of just touched on when Elsie was doing social media, and then also in some Facebook groups I'm in with podcasters. Pinterest just doesn't seem to be the platform people are using, and they don't seem to kind of maybe see how they could use it or think that it's a necessarily suitable platform. And I really wanted to put something out there that gives some basics about why Pinterest matters. And this isn't just for podcasters. So realize if you're listening and you're not using Pinterest, you're missing out. So let me tell you why you're missing out. Okay, if you're using social media at all, you're probably using Twitter and Facebook. I feel like that's where people get started. Not that they necessarily like those, but those are kind of the basic top platforms. Instagram now is huge and other places, but Facebook and Twitter are kind of like these stalwarts, and they've been around forever. And most people at least have a profile, if not a page or group on Facebook. And then most people also have Twitter, whether or not they're active. So with both of those platforms, the thing to know is that when you share something, and you know this, the shelf life of that share is not very long. Okay, so unless something goes viral, and I've had a few things kind of go mini viral on Facebook, and I say mini because I know people have had it go way worse, way better, I guess, but like in a day where I had like 50,000 hits on a website. That was insane to me, but it's mini viral compared to millions of page views for somebody else. But on Facebook, unless people start sharing and it kind of takes off, then it dies pretty quickly, especially with the new algorithm that Facebook has in place to show people in their news feed only, or not only, but mostly things that they want to see from friends or people they're interested in, much less pages, which a lot of people like, but also Facebook likes it because you pay them then to have your posts be seen. And on Twitter, they have an algorithm now. So something, I haven't read much about how the algorithm is working, practically speaking, but in general, Twitter, something lasts there about 20 seconds, I think is the last study that I read. Maybe it's a little longer, but it's short. It's seconds. It's not minutes. So the shelf life of a share, when you socially share your podcast, either the show notes or the link to the actual kind of hosted direct download right there, whatever you're sharing on those two platforms, it's quick. It's gone. You do it, People may not ever see it, and then it's over. And you have to share it again if you want it seen. Okay, so here's where Pinterest is awesome. For Pinterest, well, let me just give you an example. Okay, so I have two sites. I have Creative Writing, which is my writing site, and then I have KirstenOliphant.com, which is my lifestyle blog and kind of the hub for my family, faith. I've been writing there for years. Okay, so that's a much longer, more well-established blog, totally different kind of topics. Okay, and since I started creative writing, I really have not posted very much over there because I've been really passionate and excited about creative writing. This has meant I went from posting basically, I started out posting multiple times a day, 7 days a week. Okay, back when I was at my kind of the precursor, I guess, to KirstenOliphant.com. And then I moved to 7 days a week, then just once a day, then 5. And now it's maybe once a week if I have time. And so it's much, much less. But my traffic on that site, even though I'm not doing anything, and I don't have Meet Edgar or something set up where there's constant social shares going out on Twitter or Facebook. If I remember, I share on Facebook. But I typically get still 30 to 40,000 hits or page views per month on that site, mostly due to Pinterest. Okay. And this is not me actively pinning because honestly, before like a month ago, when I started really pinning in earnest again and using Board Booster and Tailwind, which are two tools you can use, before that, I was not doing anything. Okay. I pinned content a year ago, 2 years ago, and it's still going. And that is the power of Pinterest. And I hope you see that. Pinterest is much more of a long game. And I mean long game. Again, some of these pins I did not repin. Some of them were for posts I wrote forever ago and I've forgotten about them. And then I see that they all of a sudden have this resurgence on Pinterest because somebody finds them and pins them, somebody else pins them, and they just keep on going without me doing anything. Okay, totally magical, right? Mind blown if you're not a Pinterest user. There you go. You should be using Pinterest. And no, Pinterest is not just for moms. It's not just for people doing DIY, whatever. It's not just for home decor. Pinterest, yes, there are a lot of moms who use Pinterest. There are a lot of DIY, food kind of people on there. Those things do really well, but there's a huge surgence of business on Pinterest, blogging on Pinterest. There are all kinds of niches just waiting to be explored. And also, there's men on Pinterest. It's true, I swear. My husband's on there. Don't tell him I told you. Okay. So Pinterest is not just, I think, what people think that it is. Okay. It's much broader, much wider than that. And it has the potential to bring you traffic and bring you traffic for years. Okay. And the cool thing about it is this. Maybe you will find some new listeners, or maybe you will find some people who connect with you. Maybe they sign up for your email list and they're still not podcast listeners. So I actually was doing kind of some looking at all my numbers and realized that a huge portion of my, or not huge, no, it is pretty huge portion of my audience is not listening to my podcast. And I know that because I know how many email subscribers I have. I know how much traffic I'm getting on creative writing, and then I see my download numbers. And they've taken a big jump in the last, month or so, but they are still not anywhere close to the number of email subscribers I have or page views that I have. So what that tells me is I'm getting a lot of people who are connecting with me and connecting on a deeper level. Email level, you guys, that's deep. That's as deep as it goes. Those are your best people. But they're not listening. And I did a survey. I kind of asked people, okay, let's talk. Okay, tell me why you're not listening. I don't care. I'm not going to be offended, but I want to know, what, is it something I'm doing? Is it just you don't know how to listen to podcasts? What is it? And so I got a lot of feedback from people. And the people that weren't listening, surprisingly, you guys did a great job. I guess you're not listening now. So good job, guys. You're not listening to me tell you good job. I'll email it to you. But I'm really appreciative that they hit reply on my email and responded when I asked. And basically, most of them told me they just don't listen to podcasts. And maybe they never will. Or maybe they will. Maybe they'll start to listen. Maybe I'll win them over and bring them over to the dark side, or is podcasting the light side? Sith or Jedi, I don't know. But either way, whichever side we're on, podcasters, you may not win over all of those people, but that doesn't mean you can't find an audience. Okay, so it kind of depends on what your end game is. If you just want those downloads for your show, you'll probably pick up some people Maybe you'll find some people who are already podcast listeners, because most of the people that said they weren't listening, they just don't do podcasts. They never have, they may never. But I was a never podcast listener until last year when I got a new phone with a podcast app right there on it. And from that moment on, I was hooked and started a podcast 3 weeks later. So you just never know where you're going to connect. But I want to give you some of the best practices. Now, this is kind of to help you, if you're a podcaster, really utilize Pinterest and really get some traffic going. And I'm going to kind of share some of the things I see podcasters specifically kind of making mistakes in terms of how they're not optimizing things to get more use in Pinterest. And again, so much more in the show notes, creativewriting.com/064. So what I'm sharing, and I'm going to give you a really brief rundown of what's in the show notes, and then kind of hit a couple really big points that I hope are useful for podcasters and other people alike who have a site who are wanting to utilize Pinterest. So the things I run over in the site are how to set up your account with Pinterest. You want a business account, not because that makes your account super weird or fancy or look different. It gives you analytics and access to free tools. You want that. You want to have rich pins, and you'll kind of see, if you've been on Pinterest, you've seen these, you will notice what they are. It kind of has a little bit more information at the bottom of the pin about your site. It has your little, I don't know how to say it, favicon from your site that'll kind of show up on there. It makes your pins look a lot more official, and people kind of know it's not just a pin that leads to a dead link, which sometimes happens on Pinterest. So rich pins make your pins longer, more noticeable, and more kind of validated. And then kind of I give you a little bit more information in the show notes about setting up your Pinterest account so that it's more effective. Because Pinterest really, it's not social. It's not really a social media at all. It's a search engine. And so you're really going to want to focus on having great keywords in those board descriptions in your profile itself. So you're not just going to say like, hey, I'm Kirsten, I like coffee. I do like coffee, but unless I'm pinning just about coffee or this podcast is about coffee, that doesn't tell anybody anything. Instead, I should have pulled it up, but I talk about email marketing, blogging, podcasting, and parenting, because again, I don't niche down very well. And so I talk about the things, I use the keywords that I hope people are searching for in Pinterest when they find me. And then the other thing, a lot of people don't think about this, and this is, I think, coming back to that idea where we struggle with marketing, we struggle with promoting ourselves. You should have a board, and it should be way up at the top. That is for your website or your podcast, or maybe you have two. Okay, I've got a couple because I have two different blogs and I have a podcast, but you want to have a board specifically just for your content, and that should be right there up at the top. So if people do go to your profile, they're going to see that first, and that is just your stuff. Nobody else's, just you. And then I'm also in the show notes going to walk you through setting up your site. You want to have your site verified, which just makes it official, make sure that Pinterest can get you those analytics and tell you, how much traffic you're getting on your site, which pins are driving that traffic. And then there's what used to be called the pin it button. And I hate that they changed to save it because it's Pinterest. They should have just kept pin it. It's Pinterest. They're the only ones that have a pin it. But anyway, they didn't. It's a save it button. But basically, when you hover over an image on your blog, this will make a little icon for Pinterest pop up so people can know right away they can share it. So that kind of keeps the love going on Pinterest when people come to your blog. Okay, but the two main areas I want to talk about, okay, I just breeze through that because I give you way more information in the show notes, tutorials to how to set all that up. So if you're like, I don't have my account yet, or it's a personal account, not a business account, or my profile says I like coffee, okay, the show notes will give you detailed information about all the stuff I just zoomed on through because I want to focus on two main areas. And that's your images and your posts themselves. Typically, podcasters call them show notes. If you are a blogger or if you're a writer that has a blog and a site, these are going to be your blog posts, okay? Show notes really are blog posts, but they are tied to the show and typically will have kind of a summary, sometimes a transcription, and usually the video or audio player for your podcast right there in the post. Okay, so let's start with images. This is one where I think podcasters need to go spend some time on Pinterest. And I hate to throw all podcasters in here because I'm sure some of you, and I've actually seen some of you doing a great job on Pinterest, but I hear it again and again from podcasters, they don't get it. So that's why I'm speaking in this way. But if you're a podcaster who gets it, fist bump, we're using Pinterest well together. So these things may not apply all to you. But what I see a lot of people doing is creating images that are very like podcasty for their show notes. And that makes sense, right? You're a podcaster, you're reaching out to podcast listeners, right? So typically this will look like, the thumbnail for your show, or I've started creating a horizontal image that works well on Twitter and Facebook that has kind of my face and then the face of the guest I'm interviewing and kind of a little title on it. Okay, so I see a lot of podcasters doing that. That's not going to do well on Pinterest, probably. Okay, so you're going to want to spend some time on Pinterest looking at images. But the first thing, this is really obvious, but I remember I didn't know this, and I was guest posting for somebody else, and she was like, hey, please give me some vertical images. And I was like, why? She was like, because that's what Pinterest wants. And I was like, oh. And it was like a light bulb went off. This is a few years ago. And I just didn't know that. So I'm telling you, in case you're me a few years ago, hey, me, Pinterest wants vertical images. It takes up more real estate, okay? Their sizing changes like all social media. And don't you love, by the way, how all social media has a different size that's optimal? Thanks, guys. Thanks, different platforms. Really helpful to us. Trying not to waste all our time creating images. But Pinterest wants vertical images. Typically, I think their sizing is like 735 pixels by maybe 1150. Doesn't have to be exact, but you don't want it less than that, okay? I usually do 800 because I tend to have an 800 pixel wide content area and I like it to take up a bunch of room. It's a huge image on my computer, especially because I have a small screen. But hey, that's what it is. And so you're going to want a vertical image. That's the very basic thing. Now you could just, kind of rearrange the faces of you and your guest if that's how you set up your podcast artwork. But if you go to Pinterest and look around, maybe even look in your niche. I don't know what your niche is. Maybe it's parenting, maybe it's business, maybe it's fly fishing. Okay, you can search for those things on Pinterest. See what you see. See what pins Pinterest shows you when you search for those. Because Pinterest tries to show the relevant best images and pins for those niches or any niche you're searching for. Because again, it's a search engine, right? You will notice that there's not going to be a lot of pins that resemble podcast artwork. Okay, so for Pinterest, if you want to have success, I would recommend highly creating a separate image that is Pinterest friendly and aimed at Pinterest that is not your podcast artwork. Okay, it's different than that. So I have a video actually embedded in the post. One more time, I'm going to keep saying this, creativewriting.com/064 that shows you how in PicMonkey, which is a free tool, photo software, I create in about 5 minutes a Pinterest-friendly image with free stock photos. Okay, you can use your own photos too. It's not that hard. Takes a little practice and fooling around. And maybe you're stellar at using Photoshop. Maybe you use Canva. Either way, make a long image, okay, and make one that's not podcast artwork. Remember, you're trying to reach a new audience, a Pinterest audience. You're going to label the images with keywords. Again, Pinterest is a search engine. I go into more detail about this on the site. But you're going to want to rename the images so it's not like IMG 4001. It's going to say something like flowers on the beach, which don't ask me where that came from. I should have had a really good example, right? And I didn't. And that's just what came to me. But you're going to name it whatever it is. And then if it is flowers on the beach, because that's your podcast niche, naturally, then in the alt tag, you're going to add what you want to be the description that comes up when people hit the pin it button, okay? So the alt tag, if somebody uses that pin it button or save it button that I talked about earlier on your site, or uses, those social icons at the very top or bottom of your post to share, and they hit pin, what's going to happen is whatever you put in the alt tag is going to show up as the pin description, okay? So you want to say something like flowers. I don't even know what to say about flowers on the beach. Man, I really should have prepped for that part. So whatever you're going to say, you're going to have the same keywords, flowers on the beach, but you're not just going to put flowers on the beach. You're going to have a sentence. Have you ever wondered why Kirsten decided to talk about flowers on the beach? This post shows you why, or this tutorial will help you find flowers on the beach. This is the worst example ever that I could have used, but you get the idea, and you're going to remember this because it's so terrible. In the alt tag, you want to have those same keywords that are in the image name, but also it's what you want in that pin description. And if you haven't spent a lot of time on Pinterest, do some research. You'll see the kind of images people use and also the kinds of descriptions, and you want it to be descriptive and you want it to have those keywords. All right, now that you have your images down, or at least kind of an idea of what to do with images and how never to have an image that's named flowers on the beach. The big thing other than images is your show notes, your blog post itself. And this is really where I feel like a lot of podcasters can shine, but I see kind of many podcasters not, I guess the show notes, I see a lot of show notes that are an afterthought. Okay, and they may have a full transcription, which is great and can really help your SEO. So I've heard because it has so many keywords in there and it's long, but nobody wants to read a transcription. So if somebody's coming from Pinterest and they click through and they see transcription, they're probably going to click away. If they see just a podcast player, they're probably going to click away. What they're expecting is a blog post, okay? And so your show notes need to be a little bit more rich, a little bit more in depth, and a little bit more like a blog post than kind of what I see a lot of people doing for show notes, which is, and no offense, you guys, sometimes I see people kind of dialing it in. Now, another good reason not to dial in your show notes is just because of SEO, just in general for your site, but for Pinterest as well. When you have those people coming over, you want that post to have value, okay? Not just bullet points, not just a transcription. Again, transcriptions are great, but many people don't really want to read those, okay? So even if you are just rewriting in your own natural kind of writing voice, whatever you talk about on the podcast exactly, that's okay. Because you're going to have some people who want both show notes and the audio of the podcast. And you're going to have some people who just listen to the podcast, and you'll have some people who just read the show notes. And again, this is what I found when I polled my audience. Now, again, I come from kind of a blogger background. I already had a lot of connections in that world. So I brought over some followers and found a lot of followers through those connections who are not podcast listeners. So my audience may be different from yours, but here's the thing. Again, you're going to be pulling in a new audience, hopefully, making new connections on Pinterest. And for those who are not podcast listeners yet, you want to make it easy for them to listen to your podcast, right? So you're going to have that podcast player embedded. I use Libsyn. They have a beautiful custom player. You can see it on my site. When you go to the show notes, it'll be there. But you can also create a video. And again, Libsyn, I'm not sure what other people are doing if you're using Blueberry or somebody else, SoundCloud for your hosting. But with Libsyn, they make it really easy to make YouTube a destination. And what they'll do is whenever I upload an episode, I already have YouTube set up as a connection, as a destination, and Libsyn will push out a video for each episode. I'm not a video podcast. Good thing. I'm always in my pajamas. If not, I don't know what would be worse. I was going to say if not worse, but there's not much worse than me in my pajamas at midnight in a dark room. But yeah, it just puts up a thumbnail of my artwork, and then the audio will play. So it's up there on YouTube. Now, I don't get a lot of listens there. However, YouTube is also a search engine, right? So if I go in and update titles, descriptions, make sure everything is in there so that people might find my podcast episodes, maybe they would find it. And it's all about discoverability. I don't anticipate a lot of people listening over on YouTube to my podcast, but they might discover my podcast and say, hey, I'm a podcast listener. This is so cool. I'm going to head over and subscribe. So you want to make sure all that information is right there in YouTube too, so they can subscribe. But you can also embed those videos into your show notes. And for some people who maybe, there are people who are going to look at a podcast player and be like, what's that? And not do anything with it, even though there's a very clear play button. But for your total podcast noobs, they may just skip right over that. But if they see a big video, people are very familiar with video. Maybe they'll click play and hear your voice for the first time. The other cool thing you can do with video is Pinterest is really pushing video, which I still find a little bit disconcerting because Pinterest is vertical, right? And we all know that the video thumbnails are horizontal. They're very small, but Pinterest is pushing video. They're encouraging video. So you can also take that video and pin the video itself, okay, from YouTube. So if you're using Libsyn, make YouTube a destination. So it's going over there. And then you can pin the video from YouTube right into Pinterest. Maybe make a separate board for your podcast videos. I don't know, maybe put them on your regular one. It might look kind of weird if they're in with a bunch of long pins, but maybe if you make your own video board, then you can have them all there. And people can actually watch the video, which really is going to be listening if you're just an audio podcast with that thumbnail, but they can listen right there in Pinterest. So again, it's all about discoverability. Okay, you are creating something and bringing it to a place where you might find new listeners or people who may not listen to a podcast ever, who may not have ever discovered your site, but do discover it. They like your images, they like your show notes. Maybe they'll become a listener, or maybe they'll subscribe to your email list and be like some of my audience where they're there, they're connected to me, they're there for me, but they don't listen. I wish they'd listen. It's okay that they don't. I like to think that my long game, I will win them over and they will one day listen to podcasts. But same thing for you. You can connect with new people, bring them back to your site. They will find great show notes with headings and subheadings and things that have SEO keywords in them. Again, these are all these suggestions. They're great for Pinterest, but they're also good for other things. They're great for Google. They're great for YouTube. It's great all around, okay? You want to be discoverable. You want people to find you. But okay, so that is where I'm going to kind of end things for today. And if you're not a podcaster, I hope that these tips and the tips I have in the show notes about setting up your Pinterest profile are helpful to you. And that if you hadn't thought about using Pinterest, the idea of having thousands of page views per month coming from a site after you don't pin anything for a year, I hope that's really encouraging to you and shows you the power of Pinterest that I think far outweighs any other platform. Even though I shared last week in the Quick Fix, which is my email, a study that was done on the things that were most socially shared last year, I guess between part of the end of 2015 and then 2016 through like June, Facebook was the top sharing platform. And I understand that because things go viral, people share. But Pinterest, again, it's that long game. And I have a ton of traffic, the majority on both sites, the majority of my traffic comes from Pinterest. And that's just something you can't ignore. So if you've been ignoring it, whether you're a podcaster or a blogger or writer, consider getting into the Pinterest game. Okay. It's also a lot of fun. It's very pretty over there. But you can use Pinterest. There's a lot of other great tips in the show notes, creativewriting.com/064. But I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope it's helpful. Thank you guys for listening. Please connect. If you haven't connected by subscribing, please subscribe. I'm on a bunch of places. I'm on Google Play, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Stitcher. And if you're on iTunes, would you leave a review? I know it's a huge pain to leave a review on iTunes. I don't know why iTunes is like that, but the more reviews, the more legitimate I seem. And I feel a little bit illegitimate right now. So if you guys are listening, hi, thank you. And if you can leave me a review, that would be amazing. That's wrapping it up for tonight. I'll see you again next week, or you'll hear me again next week. But I hope you have an inspired week.